Français 2, futur simple. So now that we have learned how to do the regular verbs in the futur simple, we are going to go through and talk about some of the irregulars. But before we do that, let's take a look back at what we have already talked about. The futur simple is the future tense in French, and remember that it is used to describe what will happen. So this word will, again, is very important. We are talking about what will happen, not what is going to happen. To form the regular futur simple, you are going to start with the infinitive or the irregular stem. Now, this is the part that we did not talk about last time. With the regular verbs in the future, you are going to just use the infinitive. But there are some verbs that have irregular stems. So for those verbs, you can't start with the infinitive. You have to start with the irregular stem, and we'll talk about what those are in just a minute. Remember that if you have an E at the end, you have to make sure to take it off, because you're going to add your endings that start with A, and we don't need the E and the A together. So you're always going to take off that E. That means that every single beginning, every single stem in the future for French ends in R. So if you're not starting with something that ends in R, you have done something wrong, and you need to make sure you take that E off. And then you are going to, of course, add your futur simple endings. Before we talk about the changes that happen for irregular verbs, let's talk about some spelling changes that happen even within our regular verbs. So remember that for regular verbs, you sometimes have spelling change verbs. These are verbs that change in the boot or the shoe. We sometimes call them shoe verbs or boot verbs. I like to call them stem changing verbs because they only make these changes in the present tense. So for example, we have some verbs where we add an accent, like acheter. Remember that when we say j'achète, we add the accent. We don't for the nu and vous forms, but for all of the other forms we do. That means that in the futur simple, we are going to take that accent and put it right onto the infinitive before we add our endings. Another kind of stem changing verb is a YER verb. For example, nettoyer. Sometimes these verbs are called Y to I verbs because that's what you're doing. You're taking the Y and you're changing it to I, again, in all of the forms except the nu and vous form. In the future, you do it for all of the forms. You add it to the infinitive. You're changing that Y to I in the infinitive before you add your endings. And all of these are changes that are made to the stem before you add your endings, and you do it for all forms, unlike the present tense where it only happens a couple of times. Then we have our double consonant verbs. Sometimes these are a double L, sometimes they're a double T. We do it a lot with appeler. That's why je m'appelle has a double L in it. And so we are going to take that double L and we're going to put it right into the infinitive before we add our endings. Now, all we're doing is we're taking the infinitive, and if it has these certain kinds of spell changes, we're taking those spell changes and we're putting it right into the infinitive. And then we're going to add our endings as usual. And again, this change is made in the stem in the future for every single form. Remember, these changes in the present tense only happen in certain forms, but in the future they happen in the infinitive before you put your endings on, and you're going to use them for every single form. Now, it's important to note that it's only these specific changes that work like this. There's another change when we have another type of stem changing verb, and that is those E with an accent verbs that change where the accent direction changes. Our biggest example of this is préférer, okay? Verbs like préférer, espérer, where you actually have a change in accent, have no change in the futur simple. You're just going to start with the infinitive. It's only these particular changes, the E where you add an accent like acheter, the YER verbs, and the double consonant verbs where you're going to make the change in the futur simple. So now we get to our verbs that are irregular. And these are just flat out irregular in the future simple. You have to memorize them. There's no change to make to the infinitive. You can't use the infinitive at all. It's just not going to work. Of course, aller. It's irregular in a lot of situations. It is also irregular in the future simple. Aller, the stem is ir. Avoir is or. Courir is cour with a double R, and devoir is devre. So again, for these, you can't use the infinitive. You have to make sure you're going over and using these. And this is one of those situations where I love languages because ir is actually also the verb for to go in Spanish. So remember all of our Romance languages, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, they all come from Latin. So often you can find connections and it might not be obvious at first, but then later it's obvious. And this is one of those situations. More irregular stems. We have envoyer, which is envers. And this is one I would put a star next to it because it's so weird. In every other tense, it's regular. It's a YER verb. You change the Y to I, no big deal. But for some reason in the future, it has this irregular stem. So this is one where it's really easy to make mistakes because it looks like it just ought to be a YER verb, but it actually has a completely irregular past participle, or not past participle, I'm sorry, irregular future stem. Être is ser, and this is another Spanish connection. Ser is one of the verbs for to be in Spanish. Faire is faire, but it's F-E-R instead of A-I. Continuing on, we have pouvoir, which is pour. Recevoir is recevre. And savoir is savoir. One of your clues that it's going to have an irregular stem in the future is if it ends in O-I-R. If you have a verb that ends in O-I-R, it is going to have an irregular future stem. So that's one of those little hints that can help you if you're trying to figure out whether you're supposed to do it as a regular or irregular future verb. Tenir is tiendre. Remember that tenir works just like venir, and we're going to see venir in a minute. Some more of them. Venir, here we go, is viendre. Looks just like tenir with a V instead of a T. Venir and tenir work that way for every single tense. They are sister verbs. Voir is ver. There's another O-I-R with an irregular. And vouloir is voudre. Now you might be thinking, oh, wait a minute, like je voudrais. Je voudrais is actually not the future, it's the conditional, but this is where that comes from. Why voudre is vouloir, okay? All right, so we're going to add our future endings to all of these, and the endings are exactly the same, whether it's regular or irregular, spelling change, doesn't matter in the future, you're always using the same endings. A, on, et, and on. And again, please remember that it's ONT and not ENT here. We tend to want to do ENT because it's like that way for so many tenses, but not for the future. It's ONT. So let's take a look at some examples. I will see, je verrai. All right, so we have voir, which has an irregular stem, and then we add our ending. She will go out. Elle sortira. Sortir is regular, so I just take the infinitive and add the ending. We will build. Nous construirons. Now, construire ends in E, but remember I take the E off before I add my ending, okay? Here it is, ONS for nous. The girls will go. Les filles iront. That's aller, irregular stem, followed by the ending. So now it's time for you to go do a little bit of practice on Conjugamos. All of the verbs in Conjugamos are irregular, so you don't have to worry about regular versus irregular. There are some with the spelling change. So spelling change and the irregular verbs on the list, those are the ones that are going to be in your Conjugamos tonight.